In today's episode of Oh Crap, I Don't Know How to Do This, so I better go check on YouTube, we're going to be going over the properties of real numbers. So, real numbers are whole numbers, integers, rational numbers, and irrational numbers. All those numbers in the boxes we learned about at the beginning of the year. Positive numbers, negative numbers, decimals, fractions, even roots, and pi, and all that stuff. Now, what I'm going to show is a bunch of rules, and there's going to be letters for these rules, and those letters represent any possible real number, so whole, integer, rational, or irrational. So here's the commutative property of addition and multiplication. And this says if I take a number a and I add it to a different number b, then it's the same thing as if I started with b and I added a. So for example, if I had 3 plus 4, it's the same as if I added 4 plus 3. There's also a commutative property for multiplication, and you'll notice that all of these are all addition and multiplication. There's a rule for adding, there's a rule for multiplying. They're pretty much the same. If I take 3 times 4, that's going to give me 12, which is the same as 4 times 3. Associative property of multiplication. That's the next one. Now, a lot of people mistake these two. I'm going to show you them both at the same time, and then I'm going to help you try to remember one from the other. The associative property says if you're adding 3 different things, the order doesn't matter as long as it's all addition or as long as it's all multiplying. Remember, when you have two variables right by each other, that means they're multiplying. A times b and b times c. A times b and b times c. So what this is telling us is we follow the order of operations by adding a and b first and then adding c. It's the same thing. Oop, I had a typo here. It should be as adding b plus c first and then adding a. For example, let's say I had 2 plus 3 plus 4. If I added 2 plus 3 first, I'd get 5. And then if I added 4 second, I'd get 9. It's the same thing as if I had 2, 3, and 4 again. Notice how they're the same order as the first one. It's just that I choose to add the last ones differently. 3 plus 4 is 7, plus 2 is 9. I get the same answer no matter which ones I add first. The next one is the identity property of addition and multiplication. Now, identity, I want you to think of the word identical. How would you get this identical number back out by adding something? Well, you would add 0. So the identity property of addition says just basically add 0 to something to keep it the same, to keep it identical. The multiplication one's a little different though. The multiplication rule, or the multiplication property, says you have to multiply something to keep it the same. So what do I multiply a by to keep it the same? I multiply it by 1. So those are a little different. Add 0 to get the same number, or the identical number. Multiply by 1 to get the identical number. Last one is the inverse property of addition, and this one's also a little tricky. Basically, what do I have to add that number to get it to 0? Well, you add its inverse. So if it was 5, I would have to add negative 5 to get 0. This one is pretty difficult. If I had 5, I'd have to think of what I can multiply to get 1, and it's always what's called the reciprocal of the first number. And the reciprocal is basically take that number, make it a fraction, and then flip them. And that means we're going to have instead 1 on the top and 5 on the bottom. If you multiply it by its reciprocal, then 5 over 1 times 1 over 5 cancels everything out, and you're just left with 1. So the inverse property says basically what can you add to a number to make it 0, and what can you multiply a number by to make it 0? Well, you add its opposite, and you multiply by its reciprocal. 1 for addition, 1 for multiplication. Okay. So let's look at the difference between the first two, because those are the toughest to keep track. Most people make mistakes not knowing the difference between those two, because they both have a and b, and there's both multiplication, addition, and they kind of look the same. But here's how you remember to tell them apart. First, Notice in commutative property, the letters commute, like a car would commute back and forth to work. They switch places. Whether you're multiplying or adding, they're commuting back and forth. In the associative property, what's happening is, basically think about it like spreading a rumor. A and B start talking first, and then the rumor spreads to C. In the second case, B and C start talking, and then they spread the rumor finally to A. Or the same thing with multiplication. First A and B are happening, and then C is in the loop, and then first B and C are happening, is A in the loop. It doesn't matter. The rumor is going to get around to everybody, and it's going to be the same one. So commutative property means that the letters or the numbers flip, and it's the same thing. Or the associative property is different numbers associate first before letting the others in on the secret. So, practice these. Name the properties shown. 9 plus 7 is the same as 7 plus 9. What property is that? Is it commutative, associative, inverse, or identical? Or identity? This one's a commutative property because we're flipping, we're commuting these two numbers back and forth. 9 plus 7 switches around to make it 7 plus 9. The numbers actually change spots. They commute. D times 4 times 3 is the same as D times the quantity 4 times 3. Is that commutative, associative, identity, or inverse? Hopefully you thought it was associative of multiplication, because basically they're in the same order, but these ones are the first to go in this one, and then these ones are the first to go in the second set of problems. T plus 0 is the same as T. Is that associative, commutative, identity, or inverse? Hopefully you chose the identity property of addition, because if you're adding 0 to a number, you get the identical number out. Last one, 1m is the same as m. So you multiply a number by 1, you get the same thing or the identical thing out. Again, the identity property of multiplication, because you get m back out. Okay, so you're going to try these two. Name the properties shown. The first one is in parentheses negative 3 plus 4, outside the parentheses plus 5, or is the same thing as negative 3 plus the quantity 4 plus 5. Number 2 says p plus q is the same thing as q plus p. Is it A, the first is associative, the second is commutative, B, the first is commutative, the second is associative, C, the first is inverse, the second is associative, or D, the first is associative and the second is inverse? Alright, for more problems like this, you want to do page 56, numbers 1 through 9 all. And that's it for Chapter 1, Section 8. Short chapter.